All right, well, welcome to the first faculty learning community meeting of the year. We have two second year faculty, Shruti Bowman and Reggie Bowman, who will be presenting on what they learned in their first year. Now, Nurnamesh has also contributed to the slide deck, but he was not able to be here because of a prior commitment. I'll go ahead at this point and hand it over to Shruti and Reggie.
Excellent. Thank you. So yeah, just like was stated before, Nirnamesh couldn't, but you'll see his comments in there and I'll speak up for him because I noted down all of his comments. So I'm just gonna go ahead and get started about things that we learned in our first year, teaching and or researching. And we've broken it down into these 5 areas, specifically talking about students and how they're different, the course in general, some tools that we find helpful. Obviously, most of you, given that you've been here for some time, you may agree, disagree, etc. with us, stuff with TAs and anything else that we thought was pertinent to add to our slide deck here. So first thing to say is don't take all student criticism to heart, especially ones that you can't control. There's going to be good criticism, which I'll take into account. And I often have surveys throughout my course to see how students are doing and how they feel that the course is progressing. Are they learning? Do they agree with what's being taught? Do they like the course? What would they change, etc. But there are things that you can't control. For example, last semester, I had a student that was constantly complaining, and even in our evaluations wrote about how the classroom was really, really dark for him. And I tried to adjust, and other students started to notice it and say, we don't like it being this bright, we can't read the slides, or we can't see the notes, etc. So you can't take every single thing to heart, but note that there is some criticism that you can work on, just not everything, especially small things like that that are really out of your control. I don't know if Reggie wants to add anything to that in terms of student criticism.
Yeah, I mean, you have to take student criticism at a certain point with a grain of salt. If you have, for example, curriculum objectives that you've identified in your particular course and you kind of know, okay, I'm starting at point A and I need to get to point B, and these are the things I'm going to address throughout my course, and the students are criticizing some aspect of that, then at that point, take their criticism to heart. But if the criticism is something that's out of your control, at a certain point, you're not going to please everybody. So you have to, temper your reaction when you get the student evaluations back. So, and as long as you're fair with the students, you'll typically get decent student evaluations. At least that's what I've seen. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Another thing is that we noticed, especially this year, is that students are going to need plenty of guidance in those first few weeks, especially as we transition from in-person to online. And they'll need guidance not just in terms of the material they're going to be covering, but also any portals that you're using, like Canvas, for example. I didn't think that students would notice that we've really used more Canvas now than we were previously, especially in the computer science department. I feel like I've used it to the same extent since last year, but it feels like now students are a little bit more mindful of Canvas, and I don't think that they actually go and peek around at all the different tabs that you have available for them. For example, I had a student that didn't know where the notes were and didn't happen to click on the tab that said notes. So simple things like that. I think that even though you expect all students to go through and read and find all the material, like for example, we had to do back in the day, they may not necessarily do that. Also, in addition to this, Nirnamesh also wanted to say that not all students are familiar with tools that you may have, like for example, Piazza or Web Handin. he wanted to say specifically with last semester that he had students from different departments, like the communications department or the life sciences department. When he was in his wireless communications class, they were unfamiliar, for example, with our CSE web hand-in, which is quite frankly a reasonable thing to say that you don't understand. But he also had CSE grad students who were unable to find the tab called resources on Piazza for even accessing course material. So we think that it's always a good thing to show them either in a preliminary video or a preliminary date, or even just like a guideline for them that this is where they can find all these resources. And I guess his takeaway was that always go over the tools at the start of class. And I would highly agree to that. Reggie, did you want to add anything?
No, I absolutely agree. I mean, especially because I'm dealing with mostly freshman and sophomore level students, although I do have some junior and some senior level students, the majority of my class is definitely freshman or sophomore. And as a consequence of this, I find that if I just spend even 15 minutes on the first period of class, the first time we meet, and just go over, this is Canvas, here's your assignments, this is where you can find your due dates, and this is where you can find, class notes, et cetera, then I think that all the students are going to be a little bit more on board with whatever it is that you present in your class.
Yeah, and I noticed that even though I had a preliminary video before the semester even started, students didn't use it, which is unfortunate. So I ended up using class time when we had live lecture to even go over it again. So reiterating is a big thing with students. And then lastly, we wanted to say that have that friendly relationship with your students, but also have respect for that student-professor relationship as well. I feel like, especially being a younger professor, that they assume that we're more friends than professor. And so they might take advantage of that relationship. I've seen it happen to me personally because I've transitioned from a grad student to a professor. So I knew students prior to them being my students, but more in a friendly relationship. So you need to set some bounds, I would say, between that student-professor relationship. Yeah, and Reggie, your comments?
No, I agree. I mean, it would be the same piece of advice that you would get at the high school level. When you become too chummy with the students, then it encourages certain problems that you might not otherwise encounter. So try to just remain professional with the students, with all students, regardless of their level, because that's going to allow them to take you a little bit more seriously. And ultimately, you want them to take you seriously because it's going to increase their learning retention and everything else. It's just going to make your class go smoother, okay?
One more thing I wanted to say was that in terms of guidance, one thing I've noticed is English writing and English rhetoric and grammar and things like that, whenever we're asking students to submit a paper, it's something that needs to be worked on regardless of if you have a freshman level class or a senior level class. That includes grad students as well. They're going to need guidance throughout the entire way. And that was I think my biggest surprise that I saw, especially teaching a database systems course where you had half undergrads, half grad students. And it was surprising to see the different levels, the disparity between the different levels, especially. Yeah.
Right. And I've gotten to the point where at the beginning, the first week of class, I almost always require my students to write some sort of an essay because I want them to know, even though this is a computer science course, they need to work on that English, rhetoric, and grammar because they're all over the place, or at least that's what I've seen when it comes to their writing ability. I'm not sure why that is, but it does seem to be the case, which was kind of a surprise to me.
Yeah, at the end of the day, they need to get their point across. It's good and it's well and good if they can build something, but if they can't tell us how they built it or why they built it, what's the point? So that's all we have to say about students. And also, if you guys want to interrupt us at any time and want us to expand on something, please go ahead and do that. So next, I'll kick it off with courses, and Reggie, you can go ahead and take this slide.
Yeah, so with courses, this is something that I actually found was really kind of surprising about how universities work compared to my previous experience teaching mathematics at different levels of at the high school. Um, Basically, you don't need to follow past instructor guidance. It's useful to use whatever has been done in the past by a previous instructor if they have some notes or whatever. That can be useful, but you have to keep in mind, what are your course objectives? If you're trying to get from course objective A all the way to point B, and you see that the previous instructor maybe didn't address certain points that you thought were critical, or his sequencing of the ideas that he presented in his section were incongruous with what you thought was the best way of presenting the material, you don't have to worry about that at UNL. Like, you can just go ahead and present the material the way you think the material should be presented. And the same goes with class assignments. The same goes with your class expectations. As long as you can back that up with some sort of course objectives outline, which I think is very critical when you're designing a course, then you have that a kind of autonomy over your course. So this is in contrast to high school, where your autonomy is severely limited in many different districts. Of course, it depends on the school district, albeit. High school teachers are in many instances handicapped by bureaucrats or the politics of a high school, et cetera. In the computer science department, that's really not the case. If you know you need to get from course objective A to B, you've got full authority to figure out how to do that and how to present the information to the students in a way that makes sense to both yourself, but also to the students. Okay. Is there anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, so I mean, in addition to that, I especially experienced this in my first semester, where I was teaching that grad class, and I was using the past professor's notes, but I noticed that halfway through the semester that we were running through this material actually at a quicker pace, and also that there were software that was being used in that course that I thought was fairly archaic. So I decided to, I would say, jump ship at that point from following the guidance of the previous professor who was teaching it, and essentially take into account what students wanted to learn at that point. And we decided to go with a piece of software that they'd use from a day-to-day basis. And what was nice was to see that reflect out in the real world, because they were able to use something that they learned in class outside of class. And I saw that, especially given that many of the students that I had in that course were also in my senior design class. So they were able to use what they learned in senior design. And also they told me at the end of senior design that they were thankful that they were able to use something that they learned in class that could be translated to the real world and outside of academia. So that was one point where I didn't follow the previous instructor's guidance. Obviously, there are going to be plenty of times where the professor has done something and you'd want to follow it because they've gone through it maybe 10 times, and that's probably the best way to present it. But there are also times where new ideas and fresh ideas are always going to be good. And I especially say this for incoming faculty who are new this year. When you're proceeding with whatever class that you're assigned to, don't be afraid to make it your own. And if you want to insert a meme or make it funny or have it be jovial, do that. If you want to change the slides and have them in a manner that you like, do that as well. But that's one thing I definitely noticed in my courses that I've taken over from other professors. On that same front, I would say when we have a course and you're administering exams, make sure you have a solution to those exams before you give a problem out. I had one problem where I countered that one of the problems that I gave on an exam, or was supposed to give on an exam, was not solvable. And the reason being is that I was polling all the TAs from the course to give me problems. So that way we had a really big test bank to choose from. But we learned that some of the problems weren't solvable, even though they look like they are the case. So one thing I would say is that make sure you have some form of solution and make sure it's solvable, and not only in terms of correctness, but also in a reasonable amount of time that you're giving a student. Anything you want to say to that, Reg?
Yeah. I mean, I also encountered a very similar situation where, especially if you're taking an exam from a previous professor's course, you know, it's not necessarily the case that that everything on the exam is correct. You know, you check through it yourself one time before you administer it, just to make sure that the actual problems are either have correct solutions, or in my case, solutions that are evident to the students, that a student can actually answer the problem correctly. It just, you know, it's going to make your life easier. And if there are any questions or concerns about this, you can feel free to reach out to individuals who are part of the curriculum committee or individuals who are in administration who would have knowledge about where they think your course fits in with the overall sequencing of courses within our department, which is what I found to be very helpful whenever I had questions concerning things like, okay, you know, what curriculum objectives exactly should my course have, coming from, you know, the high school levels now into the university levels, where is my course going to fit in this sequencing? If, you know, in my instance, the administration was wanting to change certain aspects of the course and kind of turn it into something a little bit different, which is good. And so if there are any kinds of questions like that, just ask them to the curriculum committee or to administrators. And there are plenty of people in the department as well who would be able to answer those kinds of details about, you know, what kind of course objectives you should have, or is your exam too difficult, or whatever.
Okay, so we can move on to our next slide that we have. We're going to talk about tools here. And we have a few tools that I like, maybe Reggie doesn't like, or Nirnamish likes, and one of us doesn't like, so on and so forth. And I'm sure you guys all have your preferences as well. But I honestly think that for a class with more than 30 students, maybe even less, but especially with 30 plus students, Piazza is definitely your friend. And what I do is that for example, a discrete structures class, which sometimes has 150 students, you are not able to answer every single question that a student has, and maybe most times those questions are repetitive. So if you encourage them to post that question on Piazza, they can see openly that, oh, someone already asked this, and there was an answer given by either myself or another TA. And I like Piazza for that purpose, and also if they're asking questions that are relevant to the material. This semester I've implemented a extra credit feature, which I think was really beneficial to students to gain a little bit of extra credit and bump up their grade. But not only that, but ask questions on a portal and have everyone's input, and they can see clearly whether or not they're on the right track. And if someone asks a question on Piazza, a student can also respond. And if the student responded with a correct answer, not only are they providing feedback in a good manner, but they're also helping other students at the same time. And I think that the best way to teach something is also, the best way to learn something is also to teach something in that same manner. So I definitely like Piazza. I don't know if Reggie has the same thoughts about Piazza, but
I don't. Okay. So I should start off by saying my TAs love Piazza, but for myself personally, I look at Piazza and it's aesthetically very ugly system to work with. So like I'm bothered by the 90s layout of the website itself, and so I just can't get around the aesthetics of it. So I personally just don't use that particular program. But when I have used it, I can say that with confidence that students have 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 utilized that functionality to ask TAs questions, and then if the TAs respond to that question, you know that other students in the class who have a very similar question will also have that question answered for them. So, which is a useful feature. Again, I would say that Piazza is kind of cluttered. At least that was my impression of the system, but nevertheless, it can be a helpful tool that you should look into to just see if it fits into your course. Maybe not every course requires the Piazza tool, or maybe not every course would even benefit from the Piazza tool. But if you do have a class that has 250 students plus, you can take a look at that and just see if that will help maybe increase student learning outcomes.
Yeah, and in addition to Piazza, another thing that we use is Canvas. Before I jump into that second bullet, I'm going to talk about Canvas here. I personally like it. Some people don't. Nirnamish has different ideas about Canvas, but I think it's great for online learning, for administering any multiple choice quizzes. I think it's good for auto release, and I'm personally going to use that feature quite a bit this semester because I'm going on maternity leave. So I can just set half of the portion of the semester that I'm not going to be here on auto release and have all my documents already ready to go. And students can get it not all at once and be bombarded with extra information, but at the time that they need it. I also really like it for rubrics and the form of organization it has. And this jumps back into that second bullet about using a rubric for all assignments. I have it for mostly my homework, since quizzes and exams I have a different format for, but for assignments specifically, I use rubrics quite a bit. And I can show an example that I have here, but while I pull that up, what I can say is that Nirnamish, on the other hand, he's not the biggest fan about Canvas. He says that a few things that you have to remember is, for one, you always have to save and publish. And I agree with that. That can be sometimes annoying, that if you forget to publish, then students can't see it. But I mean, I think we get over it. And also that he says that, for example, if you have classes that are 400, 800 level, you can't have two separate rubrics for letter grading. So that's another thing that he doesn't really enjoy about Canvas. Can you guys see Canvas right now?
Yes,
You're good.
Okay, cool. So this is like a rubric that I had for a homework, and I used rubrics like this up to like the point level for every single question that I give students. And I find it not only beneficial for the students to know where they're missing points, but for anyone that's also going to be grading. And this is something that maybe not everyone uses, but I personally like having a rubric for classes that are fairly large and you don't want to go around answering the same question over and over again. Why did I lose a point on this problem? Well, you can see the exact reasoning why, and the reason why you lost X number of points for every single thing. It is a little bit tedious to set up, but once you have it set up, you can reuse it over and over again. So following the same format. There are some quirks with the rubric that I don't like, but at the same time, get around it. And then that thing that Nirnamish was saying was about publishing. If I go over to modules, for example, the green check mark shows that you've published something, whereas like if you had the like the not published sign, which is like the circle with the line through it, then you have to press publish for it to be visible to the students. But one thing I have seen that I found helpful is that if I go over to student view, which I don't know if many of you have used, I can see exactly what that student is seeing. So I can see that, oh, I haven't published lecture 9, so what am I supposed to do now? So I can go ahead and publish it. So yeah, those are some tidbits that I have. Let me go back to the slides, unless Reggie wants to add something over here.
No, I mean, I think that rubrics have been very helpful for me with when I'm teaching a very large class in making sure that my TAs have a standard method by which they're grading students. I had an issue the other day with a TA who had given a student 110 for absolutely no reason. And because I have another TA who's kind of appointed to oversee the quality checking of the grading and whatnot, he was able to catch this issue because the TA who gave this student 110 did not put up, hey, this is the grade you got, and this is why you obtained that grade. And so he wasn't being very diligent with his grading, and as a consequence of that, because there was a rubric, we could identify that issue and correct that issue immediately. If you don't have the rubric, then you have to contact your TA, and there's a back and forth with trying to figure out why did the TA have this particular grade logged into the grade book, et cetera, et cetera. It causes a lot more problems that you just don't want to deal with midway through the semester. And especially if a student maybe contests a grade. If a student contests a grade and you don't have a rubric, there's no way that you can't, well, it's much more difficult, I should say, to defend the grade that you gave a student, okay? So I would just suggest always for every assignment, utilize, at least post a rubric onto Canvas. And I use Canvas for pretty much everything, just like Shruti does. Whether it's releasing the class notes or releasing assignments or a place where students can turn stuff in. And I've utilized a lot of different kinds of software because I've traveled around to different places. So I've utilized software like Blackboard or the software that the South Dakota government uses, which is very, not very good compared to Canvas. And I would say that of all the software that I've used for being able to manage a class, Canvas is one of the best tools that I've encountered. It is very, very helpful, and I highly recommend using that tool. It does, as Shruti was saying, it does have a learning curve. You have to press that release button. There are a bunch of different options for when students submit assignments. There are a bunch of different options when you upload grades to the grade book. And there are a lot of nuances whenever grades are being posted to the grade book. Can the students see it immediately? Are the grades hidden? So on and so forth, that you're going to have to get used to. But if you take the time to look into each one of these issues and just learn a little bit about how the Canvas system works, then you're going to improve your productivity, but you're also going to improve the student learning outcomes, in my opinion, compared to a traditional class that's taught with something like Blackboard or some other third-party software.
Mm-hmm. And then finally, one thing that I found really helpful this semester that was mentioned in previous FLC meetings was my plan to especially flag students that are, I would say, lagging behind. And also to note that if a student is still enrolled in your class, that's one thing that you would care about in a large class. And so I have used my plan this semester for like the first homework and the first quiz, and immediately I get responses from students saying, "Oh my goodness, I didn't realize that this was due," or "Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry for not responding or not being part of this course. I still want to continue," etc. So that who is involved in your class and who's not involved in your class and who would want to proceed or not. And on top of it, their advisor gets to know if they're lacking in that class. So where they're going to get docked points, or why they're getting docked points, or why they're not contributing. It's a good accountability system that I like. I didn't really use it much at the beginning, but these past 2 semesters, I've used it quite frequently.
Yes, and I've also used it over the past couple of semesters, and especially with students who are having mental health issues. And you'll know when you encounter a student who has something like that going on. I think it's good to just utilize my plan to kind of inform some of the administration, people who can help that student about what kinds of issues you're seeing in your particular section. And whatnot. I just think it's a really good tool to use.
So I think before we move on, I saw a few questions in the chat. One more relevant to this one was, Jeff asked, how do we get students to actually look at their rubric results and adjust their performance, which is, I think, is a great question. I mean, I had students today saying that, first of all, why did I lose points on this? And I said, did you look at the rubric? They said no. So during class time, we opened up Canvas and showed them, remember I said at the beginning that every single homework has a rubric and you can see exactly where you lost points. A TA can add where you thought you could have done better in a comment. And also on top of it, if you're concerned about your grade, then you can see clearly here what you're lacking in and where you need to improve. So I honestly think that students that care about their grades or care about learning the material and things like that, they will go and look at that rubric. And even if it helps 5 students, I think that's better than 0 students, even in a class that's fairly large. And I mean, I like it, and I'd rather have the TAs press a button and have the consistency across grading versus them leaving arbitrary comments or no comments at all.
Right. And I think that when you have a situation where there are multiple students who are really, really upset about their grades, like let's say you released a really hard project, okay? And you knew it was tough and you know that you're holding the students to a high standard. And now you've got those A students who are making Bs. And so they're very upset about this and and it must be your fault, of course, that they're making Bs. What I typically, or what I've done in the past is I will, after that assignment has been graded and the grades have been passed out, I'll just take like 30 minutes at the beginning of class and say, let's look at an A+. What does an A+ look like for ABC project? And, you know, in my instance, for 155N, we had the students have to write up a project report, and the project report component was where a lot of students were getting the wrong answer. So I went through, or it is not necessarily the wrong answer, but they weren't writing their project report effectively in order to maximize their grade, and so that's where they were losing points. So what I did was I showed them, this is what an A+ project report looks like. And so if you want to get to the A+ level, let's just see all the components of that. You know, you need a cover page and this and this and this, A, B, C, D components. And if you have those A+ students, or those students that are very, very hungry for the A, they will pay attention at that point and they will adjust their expectations upward and their performance upward. I have seen it. You just have to kind of stick to your guns. You can't say, oh, well, you made a bad grade, so it must necessarily reflect on myself. No, it's their performance at the end of the day. So they have to take at least some level of responsibility for their performance. What you want to do is you want to make sure the student knows, here's how you can get to my level, or here's how you can get to the level that I think is an A+. Okay. And if the student sees that, okay, this is what I need to do, 9 times out of 10, they're going to adjust, or at least that's what I've seen. That's what I've seen. Because, you know, my project reports in 155N at the beginning of the semester were like not very good. And then by the end of the semester, I was having people write very professional looking reports. And so I think that method worked pretty well for me.
Definitely. So not to chime on the same thing over and over again, but rubrics. Yeah. Okay. So one thing that we would like to say about TAs is give them firm deadlines and give them rubrics. Obviously, you're probably sick of me saying the word rubric at this point, but I think it's helpful across the board. And also, I've noticed that if I have GTAs and UTAs, that having one GTA in charge of the other UTAs is helpful, given that they can essentially wrangle them up and give them assignments to do, give them tasks to do. And that's just another thing that you don't have to take on. And I've also seen that not all TAs are the same. There are going to be some UTAs that are maybe even more stellar than a GTA. And at some point, I think that maybe we should push them to become a grad student. So not only do would they be interested in academia, but you can keep them around for a longer time and use their skills that they have. And one more thing is to make sure that you check up on their office hours, make sure that they're holding them and they're actually there and available and they're present and they can answer the questions that the students have. Anything you want to add to that, Reggie?
Absolutely. So yeah, this was a real surprise to myself because, you know, I'm a guy who just does things. If I'm given a task, I will just do it out of principle. And it's not that the TAs will necessarily say not grade your paper if you don't give them a firm deadline. It's that the TA is a student and they've got 4 or 5 classes and this is their side job. And so if they think that they can put off their grading or whatever, they'll do it. They'll do it in order to maximize the grades that they're making in their class or in order to put off their responsibilities. And so you really need to give a very, very firm deadline and then have some sort of accountability process. Like Shruti was saying, appoint one of your TAs or one of your GTAs. I typically would recommend grad students, but you can, you know, depending on your situation, of course, appoint one of your GTAs or TAs to kind of watch the TAs. And that's the only job he has. He watches the TAs. He makes sure the TAs are submitting their assignments on time. He makes sure the TAs are grading uniformly. And he reports back to you. And sit down with your TAs at least on a weekly basis just to make sure your TAs don't drop off the face of the earth, which is very likely to happen since we've moved online. So, you know, since we're online, we're not in person, that face-to-face presence isn't there. So you want to motivate your TAs, you want to motivate your workers to get their tasks done on time, but also you want to make sure your TAs know, here's the assignments that are coming up, you know, up the stream, and this is what you need to watch out for in the future, so that they can then plan around. They know this assignment will be released on this date and it will be due this date, so therefore they need to schedule some time ahead in order to get their grading done. Okay. Yeah, and definitely check up on your TAs during their office hours. I had a TA who had missed 4 weeks of his office hours. So, you know, of course, because I have that leader TA who's kind of checking up on things, I have a guy who's putting his feet to the grindstone and holding that individual TA accountable for that. So.
Okay. And then some miscellaneous stuff that we have left over. I'll talk about that third bullet first, and then Reggie, you can chime in on everything else.
Sure.
So Nirnamish believes that prerequisites are a myth, and he thinks that from his experience in the classes that he's done in the past year, that really none of the students remember anything from the prerequisites, and I kind of have to agree with that. He specifically talks about his wireless communications class, that he had to teach everything from scratch, especially including anything with random variables or the stochastic process, the Fourier transform, stuff like that. He notes that even though they've learned it in the past and they vaguely remember it, they don't remember it to the detail that you would need for your class and for you to proceed with teaching your course. So one thing that he said is assume that you will have to review every single little detail. And I think that's true. And not only do I think it's true, I also think that it's something that you should probably do and probably get a feel for where your students are in terms of their level of proficiency in a specific topic, since cohorts are different every single year. And also when we have classes in computer science, we're getting people from different departments as well, not just computer science, you have computer engineering, software engineering, people that are outside of those three. And they just have different levels of experience with certain topics that maybe you need to review at the end of the day. Yeah, and so now I'll give it back to Reggie to talk about the other bullets on here.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. And one thing that you can do, which I've found to be pretty helpful, is that, and this is part of, you know, an assignment that you would give probably at the first week of class, would be some assignment in order to try to see where what knowledge the students are coming into your course with. So for example, I taught a cryptography course back in fall 2019, and I had no idea whether students were familiar with group theory, whether students were familiar with certain other concepts that were in comp sci, because I had a group of students from the math department and a group of students from software engineering, and then another group of students from the comp sci department. And so their leveling was all over the place. But I knew that because, and I had recognized that because I had given an assignment the first week of class just to kind of gauge, okay, what is going on in the math department? I'm not over there and I don't have anything to do with those guys. So I don't know what knowledge these students have already coming into my course. Do I need to refresh them on these concepts in computer science? Or have they already taken some sort of like 155N course equivalent in the math department somewhere? Okay, so that's just a suggestion that I would have. And it's typically, I would either make it part of my essay assignment that I give at the beginning of school or at the beginning of the semester, or it could be something else entirely. But you just want to have some assignment that you give to students in order to gauge where they're currently at and what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are, so that you can kind of adjust your course material accordingly. You don't have to adjust everything. By all means, hold the students accountable for the fact that they don't know something. We're not saying lower your standards for what you think students should do or what you think students should be responsible for. But this is going to be able to help you in order to identify, okay, this is my cohort of students, and when I'm presenting ABC topic, this is what I can do to kind of adjust things in order to increase my learning outcomes. Okay. And with that, what I would say is that on a different note, my observation is that the university organization is entirely different than the industry. This is probably like a no duh to most people, but I think it's very important because coming in from having taught in the high school, and then before that I was an engineer, the structuring of the organization, the structuring of the university, it is incredibly different from either the high school environment where it's a very rigid bureaucracy, or an environment in the industry where, again, it's a little bit more rigid. What I see is that in the university environment, people's titles can come and go day by day. People are part of XYZ committee today. Tomorrow, they're part of a completely different committee. Administrators are doing this project, and then the next day, they're doing something else. Or maybe even administrators are taking on a teaching role. Maybe they'll have a class that they're teaching. A university is a very fluid organization, and that's a good thing. It has benefits. It means that if you have a research project, you can go ahead and do that research. By all means, this is your responsibility as a professor, or your responsibility, especially if you're tenured professor. Go for your research that you find fascinating. And whereas in the industry, if you had something that you wanted to do research into, you'd probably have to go to the board of directors or somebody who's in, a CIO or some sort of management capacity in order to get your research project approved. And certainly at the high school level, things are extremely rigid when it comes to your curriculum and what you teach in your particular class and what courses are even offered. If you want to offer a new course at the university, you just have to tell the vice chairman essentially, or the chairman of the department, hey, I'd like to teach this, I don't know, computational theory for finance or something, whatever course you want to teach. You give them a proposal for this is the content that I'm going to go over. And if they like it, they'll allow you to teach that course the next semester. At a high school level, that is definitely not the case. Of course, you'd have to propose your new course to the school board, and then you'd have to maybe go to the state level to get funding for your course. A university is a very different kind of organization. It's very dynamic, it's very organic, and that has a lot of strength that's going to allow you to do things you just can't otherwise do in other organizations. Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, one thing I wanted to say is that, especially going from academia to industry back to academia, any research that you want to do, the company doesn't have a share in it, doesn't have a hold in it, doesn't guide you, doesn't limit you in what you can do. Unlike in research in academia, where you can pretty much have free range. I had a research position over at Verizon in the government sector, and it wasn't the same experience in terms of doing research there as it is here. And I'm sure Nirnimesh would probably have similar things to say in regards to that as well. Other than that, I guess one thing that Reggie would like to talk about is academic integrity. But before he gets into that, I just want to say in terms of email formatting, that's one thing that I don't think students really know is, for one, if they don't write what class you're talking about in their email, you can assume that it's any one of your X number of classes. Sometimes they don't sign their name. Sometimes they're just outright rude. So sometimes you have to guide students in regards to how to properly write an email and format it to the degree that you think is acceptable. Oh yeah, another thing that Patrick said is they don't have a subject line. You don't even know what they're talking about at that point. I had a student that said, "Could you explain this? ? Send." And it's like, explain what? What's the topic? What's the class? Where are you struggling? Nothing. So something that I like to do is that maybe in your like syllabus or on that first day, have a slide or a little note that says, when you're addressing us, say that, hello, Dr. So-and-so, or hello, Professor So-and-so. I'm struggling with this topic and I'm in this course. Could you please help? Sincerely, student name, and also their NUID, because you have plenty of students that have the same name. We have 2 Chris B's in our department itself. So we'll have similarly with students. So having their NUID also helps, and obviously have a subject in there. And if they're not going to use Canvas for emailing, then it's really, really troublesome.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I was very appalled at the email formatting issues that I would see coming into the department. I mean, I have pretty high expectations. I think I went to a decent high school in Texas, so I guess they trained me well. But what you will see is that not every student knows how to properly format and address professionals at a professional level. I have no idea why this is the case, but yeah, like Shruti said, I would just spend like 5 minutes, even if you spend 5 minutes the first day of class just telling students, look, this is how you address people at a university. Don't call, send an email to my TAs cussing them out because they gave you a bad grade. Don't, if you're going to address me by doctor or professor or whatever title, professional title you would like them to address you by. Because what you'll see is that even if you do go over this topic, there will still be some students that won't listen, of course. But nevertheless, I think it's critical to go over it just to save you one more headache that you'll have to deal with. So, because it is kind of frustrating, that if people send you an email where it comes off as disrespectful, that becomes a little bit frustrating. So, is there anything you wanted to add, Shruti?
No, I guess you can talk about academic integrity before we wrap up, really.
Okay, yeah, sure. So on the topic of academic integrity, what I would say is that academic integrity is incredibly important in preserving the university's integrity as an institution. What do I mean by that? I mean that word gets out. If your institution is just allowing the dum-dums to go on and progress without any difficulty, or you're not really holding people accountable when they cheat in your course, that word gets out, and you don't want that to taint our department. So academic integrity is extremely important at the university, and I take it very seriously. I know Patrick also takes this very seriously, and Chris as well. So I would just highly encourage everybody to also as well take that incredibly serious. But what I would say, here's my recommendation, is that do not necessarily take the advice of there's a UNL webpage where it talks about the proper procedure for handling academic integrity. I would probably disregard that page and instead follow Patrick's method or Chris's method of addressing academic integrity issues, whereby typically whenever you find a student has, say, committed an act of, they've violated, maybe they plagiarized, maybe they've cheated in some way, send an email out to that student as well as the chairman of the department and the AIC with the AIC information, the Academic Integrity Committee paperwork, stating this is this student, they're accused of doing ABC, this is the evidence, and then let the student respond. The university website, by contrast, tells you that you should sit the student down in your office and talk with them first. What I found is that that is very counterproductive, because oftentimes the student will get very emotional, and then once the student's emotional, then it's going to be a problem for you, and you're going to have to defend everything that you said to the student against administrators if that student goes to administration, and it's a big deal at that point. So save yourself the headache. Instead of following that advice, instead just fill out your Academic Integrity Committee report pertaining to the particular incident that you're looking into. Send that to the chairman of the department, send that to the AIC, and then let the AIC, let Matt, let the chairman of the department figure out the details of that, of whether or not that student did indeed commit an act of cheating. Just try to be, what I would say is just try to remove yourself from the incident. Let the chairman, let the AIC figure it out. And if the AIC says that, you know, this is indeed an act of academic integrity or whatever, then just go with that, because that will save you a lot of trouble dealing with administrators. Okay, that's and I would definitely, that this is my advice coming from experience. So,
And then lastly, I would like to say and like to end off with, sometimes you make mistakes, but it's okay. You're human. You'll do better next time. Leave it on a positive note. I mean, quite honestly, this past year, I think it's been really enlightening going from a student to a professor role for me personally, and I think others would say similarly. I notice that I make mistakes sometimes, but there's someone to catch you, or there's someone to say, hey, you said this wrong, you could have said it better. Okay, well, you learn from those mistakes. And just like how the students need to learn, you as a faculty member, you're constantly learning. So if we're in that position, we're here to learn as well. And we are all academics and pretty much for life as well. So that's pretty much what we have for our slides. If there are any questions, we could answer them. I did notice that, I think it was Bonita asked about anonymity in Piazza, and we forgot to mention that, that Piazza is great for anonymity, because sometimes a student doesn't want to send you an email. They want to remain anonymous and ask a question anonymously, or maybe make a comment anonymously, and Piazza is really great for that, because they don't have to write their name. They don't have to put any address to it either.
All right, well, thank you both for your presentation today. I'll pause here for a few moments to see if there are any additional questions. You can go ahead, you're free to also turn on your mic if you like.
Shruti and Reggie, thank you guys for an amazing presentation. I had a question on academic integrity. Sure. And, you know, I know MOS is a tool that people use to, you know, find code similarities and things like that. Do you have maybe a list of tools or, you know, things that we could use to, you know, look at, to be able to, you know, catch people who cheat? You know, in my course, I end up doing, you know, a lot of GitHub related work, and then we look at the commits and, you know, try to see if people have done their work, but I'm not sure what else I could be doing. Any advice, any suggestions?
MOS is, so I utilized MOS very heavily in 155N. I think
Okay.
GitHub and looking at the commits and who committed at what time, et cetera, that's also a very useful tool. And that's right. What, you know, I don't necessarily do that because I'm teaching a freshman level. So it's not necessarily as applicable to 155N or 101. But I think that's a great tool. MOS is also a very, very nice tool. And if you need someone to help guide you through using MOS, if you haven't used it before, Mr. Patrick is definitely very, very helpful in that. And also, I believe Chris Bone, right? Chris, would you be able to help as well?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll reach out to Ryan or Chris and bug them and get a primer on Moz because I'm not super familiar with it. And, you know, I've always relied on GitHub because every assignment is fairly individualized and, you know, there's no chance of, I mean, not no chance, but limited chance of them, you know, kind of overlapping. But okay, I will definitely talk to one of you guys about it.
Now,
Thank you, Reggie.
there's also, yeah, for essay projects, say you have an essay assignment of some kind or like a written assignment of some
Right.
or another for a project.
Yeah.
There also is, I believe, a software plugin that works for Canvas that can check people's essays.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I haven't used it, but I know it exists because I saw it in the fall 2019 semester. So you might check into that as well.
I
Okay,
haven't used
fantastic.
it either. I definitely have not used it.
Well, what is it called, Reggie? Do you know what it is called?
I'd have to look it up, but I could send that software to you.
Please, I would appreciate it. You said
For
it's on
sure.
Canvas, right?
Yes, it should be like a plugin that you can find for Canvas. It's offered by the university.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, I can look it up too. By UNL. If by chance you had the name of it or something, please feel free to just send it to me by email or.
Isn't it just like a little checkbox that you have when you have an assignment, have like a plagiarism check on Canvas for an assignment? I do believe it's just.
Yeah, I think it is now.
Oh, is it just that?
Yeah, I believe so. Don't
Okay.
quote me on that 100%. But
No, that's totally fine. I'm gonna, yeah. I'll look it up and find a way to see.
Are you talking about Turnitin, everyone?
Turnitin. I've never used Turnitin.
I don't think.
Okay, Robert just mentioned it too. Usually there's a Turnitin. I know that the College of Business uses it.
Okay.
Maybe they may have an exclusive license. I'm not sure, but I do believe it is a paid project, paid product. It might be integrated already with Canvas though. Usually with third-party stuff like that, you need to go into the course setup and install it as a plugin, and then you should have it available.
I see. Okay. Thank you. Turnitin. I'm making
Yeah,
notes.
all one word.
Yeah. Okay. So Moz, Turnitin, and then of course GitHub I already used. So okay, I think these two will help.
Yeah,
Thank
I
you.
think Canvas has the Turnitin plugin for plagiarism review. If I'm just looking at the assignments tab that I have, and if you like create an assignment, there's a plagiarism review button, or drop down. Can you see the Canvas, Luana?
I'm on Canvas.
Oh,
I'm looking at one of
in
my
share
assignments.
screen.
We can see you.
Okay, cool. So if you see on the shared screen, you see there's this thing called
Yes.
plagiarism review. So you have, I think, an option
There,
to
turn it in. There you go.
Okay.
In fact, Ryan, I don't know if Ryan is watching the chat, but I think that Ryan used it to detect some plagiarism with an application, a faculty application last year. So.
Wow. Okay. Okay. This is helpful. This is super helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think last year in the FLC, I think there was a meeting specifically on looking at academic integrity and plagiarism checking, wasn't there? Correctly.
I see. Okay.
You could look at those videos too, Bhavana.
Okay. Thanks. That's a good resource. Thanks.
All right, I want to thank both of our speakers today. Thank you, both Shruti and Reggie. We will have another FLC at the beginning of October. That will be Bonita. She had to leave already, but she will be presenting on, by then Grace Hopper will be over, and she was planning on doing this a lot last year, but of course then COVID hit. She'll be giving us a good presentation on things that she's learned and is able to bring back to the department from the Grace Hopper celebration. So look for that announcement soon, and I'll see you then. Thanks again, and thanks to everybody for coming.
Thank you.
Guys.